All right, welcome to the Holsty universe where we cultivate community and practices designed to help us better know ourselves. Today's session is going to dive into a topic that I know many of us in the Holsty community value, and that is journaling, specifically how to build a sustainable journaling habit. And lucky for us, we've got one of the best people in the world to help us navigate this question. I'm excited to introduce to you Mike Vardy, aka the Productivityist. Mike is the brains behind the philosophy and framework known as time crafting. What draws me most to Mike in his work is his unique approach to blending mindfulness and intentionality with practical tools and strategies. Mike, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here.
I'm really honored to be speaking to the members of the Holstein community. I've been a big fan for a long time. I remember, and I think Michael, you and I talked about this, that back when I was writing for Lifehack and I think even Work Awesome, I wrote a piece still known out there called 27 Manifestos You Must Look At or whatever. And it was the Holstein Manifesto. I think it was the number one. And it just resonated with me. The fact that we had a chance to work together and put this together for your community is awesome. So I know Holstein's inspired me. I know
Mm.
it's inspired people that are part of this community, and I'm just happy to be here to help people build a sustainable journaling habit. So let's get into it. Building a sustainable journaling habit. The key here is the idea of making it sustainable. That's the biggest thing that people struggle with. In fact, I would hesitate to even call it a habit at this point. I almost like to call it a practice because, like meditation, to me, it's something that is going to keep going, and it's an ongoing thing that we want to do until we are no longer capable of doing it. I've been journaling for a large number of years right now, well over, I think, at least 13 years at this point. I'm a big believer that it is an undervalued and underused tool, but not just in the productivity and improving your relationship with time realm, but in so many other levels. As a matter of fact, I actually went looking back to one of my journal entries from a few years ago. And as a writer, this journal entry was very frustrating to make on April 6th, 2015. I actually edited this slide because there were expletives after the word block because I wasn't sure how sensitive people were in the community because that's my way of journaling is to personalize it. So this lasted, by the way, for about 3 days. 2,848 days later, this was the journal entry that showed up in Reflection, which is the app I use for journaling now. This is from Sunday, the 22nd of January. I happened to be at the Cincinnati Bengals football game where they beat the Buffalo Bills. It was a long time thing that I wanted to do. I've been to Bengals games, but never in the playoffs. And that's my nephew that you can see there. I only kept the Bengals fans in the photo. My brother and his wife, who are Bills fans, I think I blurred them out. But the reason I share this with you, by the way, proof positive Bengals fan, I've had this helmet for a while. The reason I share this with you is to show the different dynamics between one entry from almost 8 years ago and then today, what literally happened only a handful of days ago. And the emotional spectrum, one completely related to work, the other completely related to the opposite of work. By the way, for those of you that are football fans out there, that game I was at, according to science from 538 the blog, was the best performance by the Cincinnati Bengals in franchise history. So that, like, all those things go, that went in my journal. That entry that you saw was just a snippet. If you use Reflection, you just see the snippet at the beginning. And that, just to see those, I would have forgotten that I had writer's block on that day or the next day or the next day. I also wouldn't have seen that I broke free of it. I also don't know. I would definitely remember the Bengals victory. I remember being there, but I wouldn't remember the way that the snow was falling and how in the stadium lights it kind of felt like it was just static and standing still. I wouldn't remember that I get to go with my brother, who I live across the country from. He lives near Toronto. I'm in Victoria, BC, which is at the other side. All these things wouldn't be available to me, not just today, but tomorrow. And the thing about journaling is that people who keep journals, as Jessamine West says, have life twice. They get to go back and revisit and relive moments, the good and maybe the not so good. But it's really important because it puts things into perspective. You can start to see things like patterns that show up. You recognize things that maybe you're doing that you shouldn't be doing, or things that you are doing that you enjoy doing. Journaling is something we should all make time for. And I would actually argue that we already do, especially if you are on social media. If you are posting to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, you're essentially journaling. In fact, most cases, the things I see on Facebook and Twitter are, for lack of a better term, journal entries. I'd also say that if some of the things that went on social media went into a journal instead, social media might be a little bit better of a place. But I want to get into these benefits of journaling. The benefits of journaling are massive. Journaling is an incredibly powerful tool for a variety of things. No, not just to be able to revisit past memories, although that is one, not just to be able to, see those patterns that I talked about, but several things. Processing thoughts and emotions. I know that by my journal, I can actually have some form of therapy with myself. There are things in my journal that I will never show anyone until I'm no longer here, in which case I'm not showing them, they are seeing it. That's because it's a great place for me to process my thoughts and emotions, the good and the not so good. And again, if we go back to the idea of me going through writer's block and me actually being at that Bengals game, that's a great example. I still feel the emotions of that Bengals game, and the emotions of writer's block, it comes back every once in a while, but I get to see those again. Another is to set goals. Setting goals is really valuable. And when you see them in your journal, when you go back and reflect and review, you can see goals that you've set that you either achieved, maybe goals that you forgot about that were important at a certain point in time, but maybe not so important now. Setting goals, the journal can be a place for that stuff to live. Memory. If you keep a handwritten journal, there's something about writing things down. There's a kinesthetic element to it that allows you to retain things. And again, I can remember what it felt like to have writer's block, and I don't have to try to remember it up here. The journal tracks it for me. Same thing with going to that Bengals game. That memory will always be there, but the actual depth of that memory, that's harder to find. Creativity and productivity. Again, expressing ideas that you may have, that doodling, things of that nature, pushing yourself towards being more productive and having a level of productiveness. I was on a podcast once for the Fizzle company, and myself and Chase Reeves, a friend of mine, we talked about the power of journaling and how it can help with productivity. Why? You can see the things you have done, the things you haven't. It essentially can act as a check mark. We're going to talk about different types of journaling, and there's one specific type of journal that's almost completely dedicated to the idea of being productive. And then finally, I want to get into the keys that you need to have to build a successful habit. So we've talked about those. Let's talk about the key elements that will allow you to journal, for whether it's creativity, productivity, goal setting, what have you. These are the keys that I believe will help you start to build and maintain and sustain a simple journaling habit, however way you want to do it. Rick Rubin, by the way, he just released a book. I don't know if any of you've picked it up yet. It's called The Creative Habit, A Way of Being. And I was listening to him on an interview just as I was getting ready to do this presentation over the last week. And he said that one of the things he talked about was the creative act. And he said, you don't tell anyone who's keeping a diary that they did their diary wrong. There's no wrong way to journal, but there are some elements that allow you to keep moving in the right direction with journaling. And the first one, which I think is super key, is regularity. Now notice, I'm not saying daily here. I'm saying regularity. You get to decide what regularity means to you. The journaling practice, as I just mentioned, is a very personal one. So how you decide to journal, when you decide to journal, the tool you decide to journal with, that's all up to you. Those are your choices. And the regularity is the same. I'm not really a big fan of people who say you must journal every single day. I know I haven't. In fact, the only reason that writer's block entry exists in the first place is because I felt I had to journal. It actually helped me through the writer's block to a degree, but I wanted to keep that streak alive. I'm not that opinionated about it. I don't think that you need to do it daily, but regularity, whatever you decide that is important. Second is accessibility. You don't want to have a journal that you keep that isn't easy to access, right? You don't want the access to be kind of any sort of friction around the access because you're very tired. I can tell you right now, there are people that I've talked to about journaling, and at the end of the day, like, I'm so tired, I don't want to write anything else. And I say, that's okay. Just grab your phone, dictate word, voice to text, and that's your journal entry. Or audio, or just straight up audio journal. Or use an app, take a photo. There's no wrong way to journal, but you want to make sure it's accessible to you and at the time of day that's most accessible to you. Okay, so accessibility is another big one. Another key element is purpose. So why are you keeping this journal? What's your reason? Is it self-reflection? Is it goal setting? Is it tracking progress? What is the purpose behind the journal? And that's going to help you make decisions around when you journal, how you journal, what you journal in. But having a purpose, and for me, the purpose is simply, I want to be able to look back and see patterns in what I've done, process my emotions, have this ability to vent frustrations, celebrate successes, acknowledge pitfalls. That's what it's there for. And at the tail end, I'll really tell you why journaling has been such a major aspect of what I do. In fact, it's an incredible part of the time crafting framework. Another element is positive reinforcement. And that doesn't mean being positive all the time in your journal entries either. But what it means is you celebrate the small wins, you celebrate the achievements, you remind yourself of the benefits it brings. Do you think that writer's block entry was positively reinforcing me? The only positive reinforcement that I had is that I tried to write, and at least I wrote in the journal, right? So keep that in mind. That's another element, positive reinforcement. And it doesn't mean, like I said, it doesn't mean being happy or grateful or positive in every single one of your journal entries, no matter how regularly you do it. But another key is to be consistent. Consistently journaling over time, regardless of your mood, regardless of your inspiration level. This is key. When you don't feel like journaling is probably the most important time. In fact, I would say it's absolutely the most important time to journal because you're holding things in. You need to let things go. There's stuff you need to get out. And tools nowadays make it easier than ever. So consistency is another one. And then there's support. Now, what's interesting about this one is the idea of support is it's not just support of others. You're more than willing to, I mean, if you're more than willing to share your journal with others and get feedback on it, that's your call. I don't do that personally. I don't share it with others. But what it does for me is it gives me self-support. And let me explain what I mean by that. So when I told you the story off the top about the 2 journal entries, I am real. Every time I go through a day, we're almost a new version of ourselves. In fact, one of the things I do is I write in the evening, I write my evening examination. It's kind of like my closing journal entry for the day. And then that acts as a catalyst for Mike tomorrow to work on whatever Mike's going to work on. So I like to think of like a day as like a lifetime in some way, shape, or form. And then in the morning, when I'm not at my best, because I'm a night owl, I'm not at my best, I'm kind of groggy, this journal entry kind of guides me in the right direction. That's a form of support. My past self, my ancestor, is supporting my future self, the new me, right? So support doesn't have to come in the form of someone else, a spouse, a partner, a friend, a trusted colleague. I don't The support can come from within. It could come from that past version of yourself to help the future version of yourself move things in the right direction. But there's a couple others that I want to share with you, and these ones are probably the biggest keys of all. Simplicity. The journaling habit must be simple for you to keep, right? You don't want to have 5 different journals for 5 different things. You don't want to, and I know some people like to use tools like Notion or Obsidian. I have friends that do that, these personal knowledge management tools that you could use for multiple different things. Anything that puts friction in the way of building a journaling practice is going to make it that much harder for you to establish it. Now, again, I must stress that simplicity and ease are different. Like something that's easy isn't necessarily simple, and something that's simple isn't necessarily easy. In fact, I would argue that they often aren't the same thing in terms of simplicity being easy. So I have 2 different journals that I keep. I have a written journal that I use in the morning to kind of guide my day, and then I have the reflection app, which I know Mike talked about. I use reflection as my daily journal at the end of the night. And that's how simple I keep it. And I freeform journal. I don't use prompts anymore. I don't have a word count. I don't say, oh, here's my work journal and here's my home journal. I keep it very simple, and that's allowed me to keep the habit going strong. I also don't set myself a time limit or a word count. You saw that. Still have writer's block. And then the extra swear word that you didn't see. That's 5 words, right? And I can tell you that other journal entry that had me with my nephew at the football game, I dictated that. I tend to dictate almost all of them. And as a matter of fact, I'm not even checking for grammar or spelling or anything like that very often. When I go back and review them, I will occasionally. But more often than not, it's just to get it out. So simplicity is key when it comes to this. And then finally, you need to have flexibility. I kind of touched on that a little bit here, because flexibility is not necessarily about writing a very specific thing or following a very specific prompt. That might be how you start. You might need to have some guidance. I know when in my journaling course that I offer, the journaling course, I do have prompts. Why? Because it helps people build that habit. It's kind of like going to a personal trainer and working with somebody to teach you how to exercise. It's kind of like training wheels. Eventually, you don't need them anymore, right? So flexibility is important because it allows you to not feel in this container nearly as much. John Cleese from Monty Python says that you need 2 things to be truly creative: time and space. You can't have just one, you need both. If you have all the time in the world but no space, you feel kind of clustered and you don't have a lot of room to move. So there's some stress there. If you have all the space in the world but no time, you feel rushed and you don't deliver quality when you're rushed. So you need both. When you have flexibility, you can play with both. You can have as much time as you want, as much space as you want, or you can deal with whatever pockets you have. That's why the 5-minute journal exists. It gives you a framework, but it's, depending on how you deal with it, it's broader or simple enough. The handwritten journal that Holsti offers, it's got some prompts there. The app itself has prompts, but you don't have to use them. Flexibility is really important because you don't recognize the benefits of journaling from the first get-go. It sometimes takes 2,848 days to see. Sometimes it takes less. In fact, often it does if you're doing it consistently. But that's key. You want flexibility built in there. Which brings me back to the last 2 I talked about, the 2 most, to me, the biggest keys. And that's simplicity and flexibility. If you don't have the other keys, you're still going to be able to build a sustainable habit. So I went through all of those just to illustrate how they all are helpful. All but helpful, all helpful. And if you have simplicity and flexibility as your allies, you can write about whatever you want. You don't feel overwhelmed or constrained. That's the flexibility. There's no format or structure. You feel, and so if you've struggled with it, I'm seeing in the chat, somebody had their journal stolen once. They've not been motivated. I think I see that in here. And you just stopped journaling. the way to start again is to start small. We'll get to that habit building aspect in a little bit here. But if you have flexibility, you can look into self-discovery. That, in fact, could very well be the first journal entry for the person who had their journal stolen, Ivory. That could be it, the self-discovery. Why are you not journaling? It really sucks. But to me, that ability to have flexibility and simplicity tied into your journaling practice will allow you to get back into it far faster than if you have this too rigid of a practice. And again, just start small. Simplicity, again, you're focusing on the process, not the outcome. It doesn't feel like a chore if it's simple, and it reduces the pressure of perfection. So together, it just makes it a sustainable habit. You put those two things together, and you're going to get that sustainable habit. So we're going to focus on the first practice now. It's the first exercise that I'd like you to do in our workshop today. Now, you don't have to do it from beginning to end. You might want to take a screenshot of this. I definitely know that you won't be able to do all of this here, but you can think about it. And this could very well be your first journaling entry if you've just fallen off the wagon and want to get back on it. So I want you to reflect on your current journaling habits and identify areas that need improvement. Okay. And then think about ways to make your journaling routine more flexible and simpler. Okay. So we're going to take a couple minutes for us to do this. I think, Mike, we probably, about 3 minutes or so just to get into this. Again, you should take
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I think we should keep it kind of brief because I know there's a lot we want to get through and we want to do some Q&A also. But I think just a little bit for us to plant the seed sounds great.
Yep. So let's take 3 minutes and I want you to focus on this. I'll leave this slide up and just reflect on your current habits, identify areas that need improvement, and brainstorm ways to make your journaling routine more flexible and simple. And I'll set a timer starting now. So if anyone wants, we can come back to this during the Q&A, but feel free to put in the chat and share with people while I continue with the presentation what your habits like now. We can learn from each other as well as where you could stand to improve upon. I've seen a couple in there saying, and Christina, you're not alone. No habits, areas of improvement, all easy place to start. Somewhat. I mean, at least you know that you've got a lot of options in front of you, but there is such a thing as overchoice. So I encourage you as we get to this next part of the presentation to kind of look at some of the strategies and tactics that we're going to discuss. Okay, Mike, did we want to do some Q&A now, or did we want to kind of jump into the second part?
There was one or two questions that
Sure.
I'll throw up here real quick just to acknowledge them. The first one was from Joe. She said, "How often do you review your journals and what do you get out of the review?"
So I review my journals every 2 weeks. It's part of a what I call the rapid review, which is part of the time crafting framework that I have. It allows me to not do a weekly review because journaling, by doing that every day, gives me that daily review. And what I get out of it is the ability to course correct quickly if I'm seeing things kind of go sideways. I also get to see all the positive things that have happened. And I mean, I tend to use my time crafting framework as a bit of a guide. So did I live up to my daily theme? All those sort of things that are intrinsically built into me. The other thing that I do, and I mean, Michael, you know this, is I do the monthly review inside of Reflection. And I also do the annual review inside of the Reflection app, which makes it a lot easier and removes a ton of friction from the process. Finally, a big review I do is I don't start New Year's on New Year's Day. I know Zoe is here in the presentation today. Hi, Zoe. I could see you. She knows that I don't celebrate New Year's on New Year's Day. I start my year the way my kids go to school. So September is when I start my year. But January 1st, when everyone is either quiet or hungover or both, I will sit in my study, not my family. I'm just being clear, like no one's contacting me. And I will read my entire year's worth of journals and I will make notes. So I will reflect on the whole year and see patterns. And actually the annual review that Holsti has inside of Reflection is very similar to what I was doing before. So it allows me to kind of get perspective. I think Gretchen Rubin says, the days are long, but the years are short. And that's kind of how it comes across. So that's how I do it. I make time for that reading of the journal entries during my planning phase on Sundays. So every 2 Sundays, I'll review my journals.
I think that's helpful. I'm not an everyday journaler, but I find just having a set cadence where I know that I'll go and do it. And of course, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But at least I know that I have that time blocked off.
And I love,
Um,
by the way, I mean, I know that David Allen encourages the weekly review and his getting things done methodology, but I've found, not just for myself, but for others, that that's the area that falls down for a lot of people. They don't have time to do it every week. And so they don't journal, and journaling's not part of the GTD practice. So at the end of the week, they've got to do all this stuff. Well, I've been slowly chipping. It's kind of like doing your taxes every week over the course of the year, or every month over the course of the year, instead of in April all at once. Like, you're chipping away bit by bit. So it's not hard for you to recall, right? So that's why I can afford to do it every 2 weeks, because I'm not doing it, every day.
right. It becomes more of a summary, a look back rather than
Yeah,
reestablishing entries for that whole time
absolutely.
period.
Journaling is not something that you quote get done. It's like not like meditation where you checking it off. Like, there's a practice to it, and I think that those two things fundamentally will help you with so many things, including your improving your relationship with time.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to hop back out and we can keep going. We'll do one
Sure.
more Q&A session after the next
Yep.
practice.
I'll call out Jamie real quick. Jamie, I interviewed James Clear. James and we've known each other for a number of years now. And I asked him on my podcast about his journaling habit, and he mentions that that was the hardest habit for him to get into. And in his Clear Habits journal, which is sold by Baron Fig, it's got the one-line entry. It's totally got the one-line entry there. So again, the guy who has written the quintessential book on habits struggles to keep a journaling habit and found a way to make it work for him. So that could be a perfect way for somebody to start building the habit. And here's some other strategies and tactics that you can consider. Okay. And we're going to go through these. I wouldn't say fairly quickly, but I'm going to bring these up. I'll share the podcast at the end, but there's quite a number of guests that I've had over the 400 plus episodes. But let's talk about these strategies and tactics, how to stay motivated, how to keep things going in the right direction. Okay. So the first thing, when you're building, set the specific goal for your journaling habit. If the idea is to make sure that you get a quick synopsis on how your day went, that's a goal. If it is, I want to make sure that I'm making massive progress on my book writing project, that's a goal. If it's, I'm going to write down every day by the way, writing a word countdown, form of journaling. Writing a budgetary statement, like I keep my finances updated with you need a budget, that's a form of journaling. If I just put what my current account balance is, or how aged my money is in the you need a budget philosophy, that's a form of a journal entry. So set a specific goal for your journaling habit. It doesn't have to be this monumental goal. It can be very simply a small goal. Rewarding yourself. Okay, so this, I'll share with you really quickly how I got into the journaling habit when it did fall by the wayside. I wasn't allowed to have a glass of wine until I wrote my journal entry. That was my reward. I could have a glass of red wine at the end of the night when I did my journal entry. As I've adopted this morning journaling that I'm doing, which is handwritten, I don't get this coffee until I do that. That's my reward. Every time I see that TikTok trend that says it's like a reward, I think about my journaling habits, because I don't get to have my coffee until I write down in my morning journal, and I don't get to have a glass of wine or a beer or whatever until I'm actually done my evening. So reward yourself, set a reward, and then on top of that, make the process enjoyable. Danielle in the chat says her pretty journal is her reward, but it's also the reason that she's able to keep the journal up, right? Because the process is enjoyable. Dictating my entries makes it enjoyable. Bullet journaling, which we're going to get into as one of the methods, is some people love doing that. If you go to YouTube and type in watch me bullet journal, you're going to see a ton of bullet journal entries, which, by the way, Ryder Carroll absolutely loves, because they took his, for lack of a better term, fundamental journaling style and made it into this big phenomenon. I've also had Ryder on the podcast, and I think he's coming up again in the near future. But make the process enjoyable for you. Maybe instead of waiting to have the glass of wine or the cup of coffee after, make that part of it. You get to have the coffee while you journal. You get to have the glass of wine. You set up a candle. You have all that. Like, there's ways to make it enjoyable that go beyond the actual process. It's actually wine while journaling. Tends to open things up again a bit, I guess. All right. And then let's get into some of the other ways that you can, the other methods, the other ways, the types of journaling that you can do that can also make it enjoyable. I'm going to leave this slide up as I talk about it because there's several different ways that you can journal. And I suggest you try any mixture of all of these. Daily journaling, which I do, writing in a journal every day, usually at the same time. All right. So I tend to tether my daily journaling with the beginning of my evening examination and the beginning of my mornings, right? Stream of consciousness writing whatever comes to mind without any specific structure or format. This could be also known as interstitial journaling, right? Like as the day goes by, you're oh, this idea came to mind, or it's some idea that I've had. That's a form of journaling. Gratitude journaling, incredibly popular, right? Writing about things you're grateful for actually puts you in a positive mindset. Mindfulness journaling, another one, reflecting on your thoughts, emotions, and experiences in the present moment. Goal setting journaling, what about your goals? Tracking progress. The bullet journal is a good example of that, which also is listed here. Bullet journaling, organizing tasks and ideas in a notebook using bullet points and symbols. Sketchbook journaling or sketchnoting, combining writing with art, such as sketching or painting. I've had Mike Rohde, the creator of Sketchnotes, on my podcast as well. Him and I are good friends. I actually have, I believe right in here, I actually have his sketchnote idea book. I'll pull it out here and you'll see it in a minute. That's another type. Travel journaling, recording memories and observations while traveling. In fact, if that's the only journaling you do, that's perfectly fine. Dream journaling, having it beside your bed, recording and interpreting your dreams. These are all types of journaling that you can do. And as promised, here's the Sketchnote idea book, which, by the way, I have not opened yet. Like I have not used. So I'm how many of you are like notebook and pen fanatics? Like I've got, yeah, like that's me. So I'm pretty precious about this notebook, but most I'm not precious about anymore. But this one, it's like and if that's a friction point for you to like, oh, I don't want to wreck the journal, get a notebook that you don't mind wrecking. Like that's the friction point. Or conversely, if you are like, I really like to, I want to enjoy the process, get yourself, like maybe you want to use a fountain pen. Maybe you like specific pens. There's lots of different ways to adopt this habit and make it something that you're going to do consistently. So finding the right method. I just listed a whole bunch of methods. How do you find the right method? Well, I mean, you need to experiment with them, right? You need to figure out what's going to work for you. There is some experimentation involved, right? So, the Monk Manual I see mentioned in the chat. I've used that as well. And the Life Atlas is their new product, which I quite like. Sorry, I just saw that in the sidebar there. Consider your personal preferences and lifestyle. So, for example, I love using reflection on my phone because when the days come to an end, I can do it quickly, simply, easily with very little friction. Like these are things that matter. Don't just start without, don't just settle on one because you feel it's the one that you should do. And don't try to go full bore into one right away necessarily either, right? Experiment. Don't be afraid to try something new if something else, suits you. Don't necessarily choose a public facing digital format either. I know we talked about having actual physical journals stolen. I'm not a fan of journaling in tools like Evernote or Notion because those aren't necessarily, there are some instances they can become public. I don't necessarily want that to happen, right? That's why I don't mind using reflection because it's on my device. It's got security. Like I'm okay with that, right? I used Day One before that as well, right? The other thing is just things will evolve. It's funny. The term journal comes from journey, right? Like it's a journey. So reflection hasn't been around as long as I've journaled. Day One was the one I used before that. Why did I switch? I liked the whole review options that reflection offered, but perhaps more tactically from my business perspective, it works across multiple platforms. Day One was just Mac and iOS. And I don't know about you, but I think there are more people in the world than people who just use Mac and iOS products, right? So remember that the process will evolve. Me adding the morning journal option to my practice is fairly new, right? You may find that over time you need to adjust. By the way, you know how you'll need to adjust? you'll probably journal about it. Hey, I need to make a change here or something like that. You'll see those patterns, right? So finding the right method is really, really something that you'll have to experiment with. And again, there's people inside the Holsti community that can help you out with that, right? All right. The coffee's in here. The coffee's in that red mug. How do you keep the habit going? Like, what do you do to keep the habit going strong? Let's get into that. Okay. So there are several things that you can try to keep the habit, either start it, keep it going, and make it sustainable. You've experimented with the right model. Maybe you've fallen by the wayside with it. You have your goal, you have your purpose aligned, you've got simplicity and flexibility in mind. Now, Mike, I want to start, I want to keep it going. What do I do? Well, here are some things that you can try. Big one is start small. Start small. James Clear mentions that one line. Maybe that's all you need, right? What if you didn't know what to journal, but you had taken photos throughout the course of your day and you used that photo as a prompt? That's a way of starting small. You know, I've had some people say, could I use AI to start small? You could. I don't know that it's going to be very personal, but you could, right? You could use it to get a prompt, but I don't know that I would do it to write a journal entry per se, because I think that would make it an artificial journal, which I don't think is the benefits of journaling. But, you know, starting small is a way to get started. Use a photo, maybe have a prompt, have some guided prompts that will help you. That's a way to start small, and don't put pressure on yourself in the process as well. Okay. Again, being consistent. I say things to try. I guess Yoda used to say, do or do not. There is no try. But remember, consistent doesn't mean every single day. It means whatever you decide it to mean. There's this new website that a gentleman that I follow on Twitter who's into productivity as well. His name is escaping me right now, but he started a website called Polar Habits. And what he said, habit streaks suck. Now, what he means by that isn't that like habit streaks suck in general. It's just we have in our head that it's got to be daily, right? So he's calling them polar habits, and he has like 3 different categories. I like that. I really like that, because when I talk about time crafting with people and we have daily themes, it's like for today's Thursday, today is my optimization day. So I focus overarchingly on optimization throughout the course of the day. When I'm done with us today here, my brain will navigate towards the tasks that are related to optimization. But I don't do optimization every single day. But if I do it every single week on a Thursday and I live up to following that theme, that's going in my journal. That's a habit. That's being consistent. So don't get tripped up by, oh, you got to be consistent, do it every single day, do the same thing. I mean, we love novelty. Human beings love certainty and uncertainty equally. We need both. So don't get tripped up by this consistency trap. Instead, I would focus on, like I said, sustainability. So that's another thing to try. This gets a bit rigid, but it's definitely doable. Make journaling a non-negotiable part of your daily routine. Okay. So how did I do that? I tethered it to an existing routine. It's part of my evening routine. I have like a 4-step evening routine, and journaling's part of it. Made it part of my morning routine. It's what I do before I get this coffee. Tether it to an existing routine that you already have. Okay? That's how you can make it non-negotiable. And if you want to make it further non-negotiable and you struggle with, oh, I'm so tired of this, then that's when you have to look at the way you're journaling. Okay? And remember why you started journaling, and remind yourself of the benefits it brings. That could be the first like 8 entries in your journal. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because Mike Vardy said I should. And he said there's going to be benefits. Then eventually, like, oh, Mike was right. Like, there are benefits, and you will eventually build that over time. So that could be the catalyst that you should try. And then finally, don't be too hard on yourself if you miss a day or two. So we tend to be our own worst critics. I can tell you, every time I finish a presentation, I just did one for Google not an hour before here. I leave that call. I'm like, did I do okay? Did I screw up? It's like when I was on stage as an actor. How many of you would know that I missed a line or that I screwed up? You wouldn't know unless I made it obvious that I did. Oh, I should have said that thing. Oh, I should have done this, right? We tend to be our own worst critics. Don't let that seep into your journaling habit. Remember, you can't do it wrong. It's your journal. And I'm at the point now where my journaling habit is so entrenched and so much a part of me that when I'm gone, it's going to delight some people on certain pages, and it's probably going to piss off some people at certain pages as well. That's why my wife has not got the password to my journal. No, I'm just kidding. But the point is that it's part of what I do. It's become a practice, and that is so huge. Speaking of practice, we're on to the second practice now. So what I want you to do, we'll take another 3 minutes here, because I know let's do 2 minutes, right, Michael? Let's do 2 just to be safe, because we want to leave room for Q&A. Okay, 2 minutes. Just bullet point this, okay? I want you to set specific journaling goals for yourself and then commit to making a plan to achieve them. I don't think you can come up with the plan right now in this, but screenshot this if you want. I know it's going to be available for you inside the community. Then experiment. List maybe a couple of methods that you'd like to try, and then find the one that works best for you. And again, that slide lists a whole bunch of them. And then create a journaling routine and implement habits to make it sustainable. So this is actually the practice building part. Start small, build from there. We'll take a couple minutes. I'll set a timer, and we'll just think about this and bullet point it. I'll be back in 2 minutes. All right. So if you've got a bit of a sense of what your plan and your goals are going to look like, throw them in the chat. Again, they don't have to be massive or monumental. Start small. Someone mentioned the Monk Manual. Yeah, I got one of those right here. I've talked to Steve from the Monk Manual. I love this thing. This thing's really good, especially if you love writing things down and you want to have those guided principles, and it's fairly layered. There's this journal. How many people know what this journal is? If you know what it is, put it in the chat. Probably one of the most famous people that's journaled in recent years. Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights Journal. I don't know if you guys know what this one is. Mike, does this look familiar? Reflect and Reset, again, guided.
Love that one.
But this one I like too. I picked this up the other day, and I actually have started to use it just for interstitial journaling throughout the day. I love this quote. A life worth living is a life worth recording. Jim Rohn. Like, So this is the quote. This is the journal where I'm putting things in that someone can read, that I want to have read so they can learn from me. I'm not going to say that it might be my Marcus Aurelius kind of journaling practice that people could read it and go, oh, this guy, he got it. But maybe. I want to show one more thing, Mike, before we move on. And there are lots of books about journaling. Andy Warhol's journal. There's a book right there called The Assassin's Cloak, The World's Greatest Diarist, A Book of One's Own. Alan Rickman released, well, he didn't release, but his estate released his diaries. Journaling is not a new practice. It's been tried, tested, and true over a number of years. And I have to say, as a productivity guy, if the calendar tells you the directory of your days and the to-do list tells you the details of your days, then the journal tells you the story of your life. And that's Mike Vardy. That's mine. It's actually written down in this guy right here. So I want to thank you for being here today. I know we got some time for Q&A. And if you're interested, I know, Mike, you're going to share this, productivityist.com/kit to get the time crafting kit. And by the way, in the little bottom there, you see the thing that says, see you later. That's how I end every journal entry. And the reason is because my favorite movie is About Time, which is Rachel McAdams and Domhnall Gleeson. And it's the last line from the movie. And if you've seen the movie, then you probably know why it's my favorite movie. And there we go.
Thank you, Mike. You got to a lot of the stuff in the comments, but I wanted to make sure we highlight a couple of these as well. First, I saw someone mentioning the Atomic Habits. James Clear is a great resource also on building habits. We talked about his book, and you have a great interview with him. Someone else asked, What's your podcast, Mike? So we're going to share a roundup of all the resources that Mike mentioned and the slides in our follow-up email. We're going to email that to everyone who RSVP'd for the event today.
Carrie
But
mentions David Sedaris. Yep, seen him
oh,
live.
yes.
Brilliant essayist. Love his stuff. Laugh Kookaburra is one of my favorite essays that he ever wrote. If you haven't read it, it's called Laugh Kookaburra Laugh. There's a real smart story in there, a lesson for all of us. So it's great.
I thought it was interesting how people also shared all the tools that work for them. The important thing for journaling is to find what works for you. And we had, so Christina mentioned that she uses a sketchbook for journaling. This next from Carrie, she talks about how she goes back through her travel journals. And for me, some of my favorite entries are the ones where I actually thought to take a moment while I'm traveling and just write down what happened, because you feel like you'll never forget it. But after a week or a month later, there are details that just kind of start to fade. And back to your point, Mike, I think that, for example, using a dictation function is so helpful because it allows you to just capture thoughts very quickly without really pulling you out of the moment. And it goes back to just finding the most frictionless method for you. I saw some other things come up here about using the importance of using paper and pen for some people. A good pen is really important. And I know a lot of people who are writers, they find that having the right pen makes all the difference. See what else is there. One thing that James Clear mentioned and John Wood here emphasizes it. It's so important to, for some people to identify where and when you're going to do it. And that sometimes removes the friction that's blocking us from being able to build a practice. So we are down to the very end here. I want to make sure that I just captured all the questions that came up. Mike mentioned Reflection app, and just to recap, this is an app that we built at Holsti. It's the official journaling app for the Holsti community, and it's available to everyone anywhere. It's a free app that you can use. There are some premium features. Holsti members have access to those premium features automatically. If you're interested in giving it a shot, I'm going to just drop into the chat a link that you can use to experience the premium fully. I also wanted to call out that Mike just launched a journaling course. I think, did you launch it today, Mike?
No, we launched it on the 19th of January, but it goes up in price every day, coinciding with the date. So today's the 26th. So it's $26 today. Tomorrow it'll be $27, all the way up till the 30th of January. And it'll stop at that $30 price point, because 30 days to build a habit, we kind of tied it in like that. So it's now part of my community, which is also built inside a circle called the Time Crafting Trust community. So it's got prompts and more lessons in journaling and things like that. So yeah, it's a new course. It's like a mini course, and it's a living course, which means we're adding things to it. So I'm excited because a lot of people have jumped on it right away, because January is a month where we do this kind of stuff: reflect, renew, recharge, and this is a perfect time to adopt a journaling practice.
I'm also going to call out your time crafting email for people in the Holsti community who are fans of the reflection email. Like, any final words before we sign off for today?
Yes, Barb in the chat said that she hopes that Cincinnati beats Kansas City. I also hope that. That was such an incredible experience. Buffalo fans are awesome. So I want to just tie that in because it was awesome. And thanks so much, everybody, for being here. I know journaling is one of those things where there's a friction point. There's a stigma that can be attached to it and things like that. But I know that if you adopt a journaling practice, it's going to benefit you. It's going to increase your productiveness. It's going to help your relationship with time, and you're going to feel more balanced. So if there's one thing that you could do today to start improving the balance in your life and productiveness and your time, journaling is it.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. I know you coming from one meeting to another meeting, so we're so grateful that you made time to join us today. Thank you all for joining, and I'm wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day, and looking forward to having you join us for the next speaker session.